Good morning. How you doing, everybody? My name is Navarro, and I'm here on behalf of the Navarro family, talking a little bit about Pete's Camp and Pete's Camp Racing. And for those who may not know, Pete's Camp is a campground, resort, retirement community on the Gulf of California in the town of San Felipe. That is approximately an hour and a half south of the city of Mexicali, and the camp has been there since the early 1950s. The property that Pete's Camp sits on was first deeded to my father's uncle, Pete, okay, which is where the Pete in Pete's Camp comes from. I'm not Pete, my father's not Pete. It was my father's uncle. And our connection to Pete's Camp was through, obviously, my father's uncle. My father joined Uncle Pete early on when Pete's Camp was established, helping him run the business, being, let's say, the gopher, being the young boy that was doing all the errands, helping things move along. Through that experience, my father was able to meet some very nice American folks that brought him to the States to help out around their home and look after their kids. And my father then went on to high school, then on to college, and then on to launching a very successful career with General Telephone, which has now become, has morphed from Verizon to Frontier. But nonetheless, it was General Telephone that helped my father get started and live his American dream. And, as a child, my experience with Pete's Camp was, all those beautiful things that you remember when you're a youngster, going to the beach, spending time with family. Those trips to Pete's Camp, I used to often, look out the window on the long drive down, and from time to time there would be these off-road races going on outside the car window as we're driving down the Mexicali to San Felipe highway. And I became fascinated by that, and that really just, for whatever reason, just got me hooked on the sport of off-road racing. I remember telling my father at an early age, saying, "Hey, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but one of these days I want to do that." And I often recall him telling me, "Son, you need to go to school. Quit wasting your time with dreaming about racing and all this sort of stuff." He goes, "You go on, you be a lawyer, you be a doctor, and then you can afford to do whatever you want. But until then, forget about this racing stuff." That was my earliest recollection of, both, getting hooked on what became my passion, my hobby, and then having my father tell me, "Hey, no, you go over this way." And as most first generation firstborns in the United States of immigrants, right, where we have that weight on our shoulders that we got to bring a result, and we've got to do something to help propel the family forward. So did I go on and go to college and then to law school and all these sort of things? Yes, I did my part for the family, and my father also did his. Okay, because it's funny. It was a kind of auspicious beginning into the sport of into off-road racing, motorsport, but he came around. Okay, and the beauty of that, and a lot of why we race, and I'll bring it back full circle, okay? But I don't want to be on the negative tangent that my dad was poo-pooing racing all the time, because he did, okay? But then the funny thing about how this comes full circle is through him getting involved with me as a deal. I said, "Hey, look, Dad, if I graduate from college and or if I get into a major university, and I went to UCLA, a proud alumni of UCLA, help me do a race. Just let me know what it's about." Well, he did. I kept up my end of the bargain. He kept up his. And unfortunately for him, well, I should say, well, fortunately, we went out and we won that first race. Okay. Signed up for my first race. He made it possible. Pete's Camp made it possible. And we went out and won. And then the story snowballs from there. because then we were kind of hooked a little bit, and he became a big proponent. My grandfather, I have very fond memories of him coming. You know, the beauty of it is that, you know, at one point, my grandfather, my father, and myself, we were all at races together. And from there, the story continues on to where my son came in the picture, and you know, through him, we've built quite a good level of success. Not that we didn't have success on our own, we won a lot of races, but it's one thing to win races, and it's another to win championships. And, you know, that's, I think, the trajectory that we want to stay on. It's a trajectory that, you know, we want to continue striving for. And it's why we do what we do. We spend time together as a family, and we look to do things right, and we look forward to winning championships. Once you've done that, you kind of know how to do it, and that's what you strive for. And that's where we find ourselves today. So, you know, I was talking earlier about bringing things full circle, and we've talked about Pete's Camp and how it got started. There was a point in Uncle Pete's life where he had had enough. He wanted to retire out, and he called my father and he said, "Hey, you know, I'm done. There's no one else I'd rather see this go to than to you, and I'd like to sell you the business." And fortunately, my father built a very, very nice career with General Telephone, and he dabbled in real estate here in Temecula, and did quite well. And at the time when he got the call, he was in a position to be able to buy Pete's Camp from Uncle Pete. And here we are, some, you know, 30 years later, and we've seen an incredible, let's say, rise of Pete's Camp and the Pete's Camp brand and what Pete's Camp means to people. You know, I've been fortunate enough to work around the world, and there's nothing better than to be outside of the United States, in Europe specifically, and to see people wearing Pete's Camp t-shirts, okay, overseas. That's a great feeling, because we've built that. We've built that on our backs. And early on the conversations, when I was trying to find ways, any way I could, to attach myself to racing and to attach the family business to racing in a legitimate way, the conversations were such that I told my dad, I said, "Look, you need to understand, you know, the community that we service and that comes here. Okay, yes, seasonally, but at the end of the day, it's an off-road community. People that like to come here and ride motorcycles, ride their buggies, off-road racers when they come in town for the racing, doing the pre-running." And I said, I think that it's an important, worthwhile investment to showcase who we are and what amenities we can offer people that are coming down to this part of Mexico. Make them feel that, you know, we're part of the community, so they can feel a little bit of safety and comfort in knowing, hey, the people that run that place are like us. They have the same likes and interests. It might be kind of cool to hang out there. And, you know, he was a little skeptical at first, but I think he came around and he saw it. And I'd like to say that, you know, in terms of San Felipe, and you think of racing in Baja, Pete's Camp is synonymous with the off-road community and racers. And, you know, I think anybody who enjoys that sort of lifestyle of being in the beach, being in Mexico, I think can relate to who we are, what we stand for, and what we have there. And we're always striving to continuously improve. I think that's in our DNA, and that's what we like to do. And when we do things, we do them ourselves, typically. If we don't, we find the best people in the business to work with. And I think that's also synonymous with our racing. You know, and the main thing is spending time together with the family and doing things right and having a great time. And that's what's behind Pete's Camp and Pete's Camp Racing.
So, kind of just want to give you behind the scenes, kind of, what I see through, or what I'm thinking through my head during a typical race, so that you can understand why we do this crazy sport of off-road racing. To be honest with you, it's an interesting form of motorsports. It's not like your atypical, roundy-round course, asphalt course, or say a road course here in America or in Europe. It's the conditions are always changing, the variables are always changing. That's kind of one of the things that I love about off-road racing so much is that you never know what's around the next corner, and that kind of leads you to what off-road racing and what it takes to be an off-road racer and compete competitively in the sport is you have to be really mentally strong because you're constantly going through a mental battle, not only with yourself, but you're doing a physical battle with the conditions, and then also too you have the challenges of the race course that come in front of you. Your competitors are another big challenge. Another challenge is also the spectators, which is like those guys are like 8 balls because you never really know what's going to happen. It just kind of like you're coming up to them, and when you see a lot of them, you know there's something around the corner, or there's something that they're trying to get you to do to have some excitement in their day. Sometimes it's hit or miss. You never know if it's going to be bad or good or not. I've seen a lot of bad accidents where racers, non-Baja race, and there's a difference too. There's, we have Baja racers, and then we have racers who race up here in the States, and no different. There's no like split or anything, but it's just different. You have a Baja racer who coming up to the States. It's tough for non-Baja racers to come down for the first time and race Baja and be competitive. It's tough because you've never been in this kind of environment that we've seen, and so I always like to say Baja racers are always way more experienced racers. I would take a good experienced Baja racer over somebody who's been racing in when I say USA, in the US, it's best in the desert racing or snore racing. Like the Wild West, and that's kind of another really cool thing about the sport. It's just there's so many variables that you can never really count on. So, for example, like at our last race at the Baja 500, some of the challenges that I endured in the race was, starting the race, we started I believe 6th place. They did a new course for this year's Baja 500 where we went through town and did like a little stadium start. And one of the things that we knew going into the start of the race was, okay, there's a few bad spots right off the start where it's really deep silt, and the silt is kind of one of those things in Baja that gets you. You'll bury your truck or buggy to the skid plate, to the axles or whatever, and you're just stuck there unless you get some locals with a tractor or a couple horses to pull you out, and you better get digging. And that was something that we had to go through. It's like, okay, you're coming up to it, it's coming. Don't mess up, and so that's a challenge. And then when we came up to it, there was like 5 or 6 other vehicles that were actually stuck in there. So that's kind of one of the things. It's like you come up to something that's challenging, but not only that, you have your competitors are maybe stuck there or creating a new challenge on top of that already difficult challenge, obstacle to get around. There's so much variability. We were racing and at the 500, and I had communication issues with my co-driver. Each vehicle, typically in Baja, is a 2-seat vehicle with a driver and a co-rider. Some guys are crazy enough to do the race in a single-seat vehicle. You don't see too many of those just because, I don't know, it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling going out in the middle of the desert where you could get stuck for a couple of days and you're by yourself. So it's always nice to go out there and do this challenge with somebody. It's a really, really neat thing to have your partner, your teammate. But interestingly enough, what happened is I had communication issues with my co-pilot, and basically my co-driver, my co-rider, he monitors all the vehicle systems, temperatures and all that stuff, making sure the water temp, oil temp, transmission oil temp isn't getting too hot. He's also in charge of navigation, so we have these really nice Lawrence pieces of equipment that we can download and upload our course maps and course notes onto a big map of the whole race course in all of Baja, so you can really have all your notes, and that's why you do a lot of pre-running. So he does all the he had all the navigating, and so it was difficult because we lost communications, and that was kind of one of the things that I had to go through and fight. Was not only was it really hot, and we were having the challenge of communication, and you're coming up on these really, you're driving through these small, single track dirt roads, I guess you'd call it, and you're just going as fast as you can, trying to beat all your competitors, and it's just really difficult to be doing that without having some kind of idea of what's around the next corner, because you come around some of these blind corners and all of a sudden there's a 180-degree right turn or a 180 left, or there's a big rock or a big danger on the left or right side, and it could be really serious. Especially when you're doing like 80 to 90 mile an hour and you come around a blind corner and next thing you know there's a huge ravine off to your left and you go off the course. And I've seen that plenty of times. Fortunate enough that we pre-run well enough that we had the notes, but it was just it's a really interesting physical, mental battle that we had to go through, and not only myself but all my competitors. It's just part of the sport, and you really, to be successful in off-road racing, especially in Baja, you really have to be like really strong oak that is malleable, that you can bend a little bit, and it always comes back to true. You kind of if you have a mistake or something happens and man, what if it's the first 20 miles in the race and you're racing a 500-mile race or even a 1,000-mile race at the Baja 1000, you gotta just be malleable and always come back to true and say, hey, look, there was a mistake. Let it go, because what tends to happen is you make one mistake, and if you can't just come back to that true, these mistakes start compounding on top of each other, and then you have all then it just gets worse from there, and it goes downhill, just like anything else. But it seems that it seems to become a lot worse when you're racing down in Baja. It's one of those things that you got to be super malleable on. I'm trying to think of a few of the other things. It's Baja is very interesting, or off-road racing. I keep alluding to Baja, but I think Baja is just kind of one of those mysterios in off-road racing where it's like a lot of people want to go and be in Baja and challenge the Baja 1000 and the Baja 500. It's just kind of one of those trademark names in off-road racing. It always gets a lot of pull, especially the Baja 1000 every year. Everybody wants to do that. It's not. A lot of people go and compete to win, right? But a lot of people go to the Baja 1000 or the Baja 500 to compete against Baja. That's really interesting thing, because it's like, well, it draws in so many people because of the interest, the allure of the Baja. and competing in the Baja, and it's pretty challenging, man. It's no easy feat, especially the Baja 1000, the Peninsula Run. That is probably by far one of the most mentally, physically challenging events that I've ever competed in. I've heard a lot of, so I used to play really competitive soccer, and all my friends used to give me a hard time, oh man, racing isn't a sport, you just sit there. And I just kept to myself, and I highly disagreed with this statement because they didn't understand what it was like to be in one of these race vehicles, It just made me laugh. I laughed to myself. I'm like, all right, guys. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, I get to sit there, but I get to beat the crap beat out of me, for 8 to 14 hours in one stint. And the cabin of the vehicle is above 200 degrees. I'm sitting right by an engine and a transmission that are just cooking me pretty much. My feet are on fire for 300 miles because there's so much heat that builds up in the cabs of these race vehicles, with the motor being right there next to you and the transmission and the exhaust. We're all the chassis builders and builders and prep guys. We're all trying to make a really tight package and minimize weight while getting as much of the stuff that we need in the vehicle. So with that, we have all these constraints, and a lot of times you get sat next to a pretty hot heat source, and then on top of that, not only the conditions that you're racing in, there's this huge mental battle where you're constantly fighting with yourself, and I've done it myself as well. It's kind of one of those things like, where does your head go when you're out there racing and you have like 300 to 500 mile sections, and literally that can mean from 7 to 14 hours of just sitting there driving. And I tell you what, it's trying to keep a hold of the steering wheel. It is very, I get arm pump. I mean, that's how difficult it is. 5 hours in, I'm getting arm pump, and that's one of the things that I'm constantly battling and trying to, manage throughout a stint in the race truck. As a driver or co-rider, it's really difficult because you're managing so many different things and you're having so much different information being thrown at you. You have the visual information. As a driver, I have my co-rider audio. He's talking to me constantly. So it's for example, like when we're coming down a corner, it's left 3 into right into a right 4, blind rise, stay right, rock on left, rock on right. It's very similar to kind of like how WRC is. Courses and everything are a little bit different, but really similar. And it's just, there's so much information being thrown at you at once. And physically you have to be managing the gas, the brake, steering input, always looking ahead because you never know what's going to be there, either locals, another competitor. And sometimes when you go pre-running, there's something that you miss in notes, and it wasn't marked and it was overlooked. And a lot of times when you go pre-running, you're doing the course a little bit slower than you would in the race vehicle. So when you get to the race time, you come up on something and it's a lot different than when you went and pre-ran it the week before or the day before or whatever. And it's just, the variables are constantly changing. And I think that's what keeps us coming back and doing it, because we love it so much. And it's always a challenge. It's a challenge of yourself. It's a challenge of the team that you put together to support you in the pits. And that's another thing is you have the chase team, which is extreme. That's a whole nother battle. I recently just chased for my friends that pit for us in Baja at Vegas to Reno here in the U.S. It's a race from Las Vegas to Reno, really Beatty to Dayton, but it was an interesting perspective because I'm so used to being always in the driver's seat of these races, and I was one of their pit captains, and we both have 2 of the same trucks. Different trucks, same builder, manufacturer. So I was one of the head mechanic guys for them, and it was really interesting. It's a totally different aspect. You have you have many different cogs that make up this whole entity of an off-road race team that if one has some kind of falter or issue, the whole system just doesn't work. And from the chase team perspective, it's they're going through their own whole battle of mental. For example, what's going on with the guys? Where are they? What's happening? Are they moving? What's going on? Are they safe? They have that mental challenge, and then there's the mental challenge of being on time, remembering all of their assignments, what they need to do, where they need to be, navigating the Baja Peninsula to get into certain areas where we decided to do a pit, which sometimes can be very remote locations. Which, mind you, most of Baja, you cell phone coverage is hit or miss. A lot of the amenities here in the United States that we have are not readily prevalent down there or available. So they're fighting that. And then on top of that, they're fighting road conditions, and down in Baja, the road conditions can be very, very dangerous. And so they're fighting that, trying to be certain places on time at a certain time, and fight traffic. And it's just, it takes so much. It's not just the driver and the truck to make these off-road teams successful, but it takes a whole team of supportive people that are 100% committed into what we're all doing. And it's a big team effort a team effort and team challenge for all of us, because without one person doing their job perfectly, then you start to have a lot of issues.